Bible Worm, reading the Bible with Bible Worm.
Welcome to Bible Worm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, professor of religious studies at Hendrix College and theologian in residence of Canvas Community in Little Rock, Arkansas.
And I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, Director of Lifelong Learning and Music at Congregation Or Hadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish, one Christian.
This week, we're reading 3 stories of Jesus told in Luke 6, 1-16. In the first 2, Jesus is in a dispute with some Pharisees about observing the Sabbath. In one story, Jesus seems to claim authority over the Sabbath, given his identity as the Son of Man. In a second story, Jesus presses the boundaries of mercy, healing a man on the Sabbath, even though he is not in life-threatening danger, creating anger among the Pharisees. Then, in a third story, Jesus calls the 12 apostles who will carry on his ministry after his death and resurrection. Together, these stories make us think about the relative importance of Sabbath and mercy, the extent of our obligation to engage with our community on its own terms, and the danger that accompanies apostleship, both for the 12 and for Jesus himself. Thanks for joining us. Hey, Amy, it's Bible Worm time.
How you doing, Bobby?
I'm good.
Good.
Well, we're in Luke chapter 6, verses 1-16. This is a set of kind of like the first 2 little vignettes in this text are going to be thinking about like the extent of Sabbath observance and how work applies there. And then the second little, or the last little part is about Jesus calling the rest of his apostles, which I don't know what the connection's going to be there. But, anyway, that's sort of the ballpark in which we are moving today. I will tell you, this gave me a little anxiety as I was preparing it, because this is one of the places where Jesus and the Pharisees get a little feisty. And sometimes I worry that that's going to get us a little feisty. Although I like feisty Amy. And so, but then when I mentioned it to you earlier, you were like, nah. So maybe my fears are unfounded.
I mean, okay, I don't know what I'm like allowed to say, but here's how I'm thinking about Jesus at this moment, like relating to Jesus as a Jewish person.
Yeah.
Jesus was a rabbi with really important ideas. Like really important ideas, many of which resonate for me. He pressed on a lot of boundaries that I also press on. We don't, as you and I say often, like we can't go all the way down the path together. Like there's a point at which, I'm like, okay, peace. But there's a lot of good in here. And I feel like the questions that are raised here are really valid questions. And I don't know, I can try to represent what I think the Pharisees are thinking and what Shabbat is like in the community as I know it. That maybe complicates this a little bit, but I don't know. That's my mindset as I'm going in.
That's really lovely. I will say that reading with you has also helped me in a similar way, because there is a tendency, as you know, among some Christians to just be like, oh, those Pharisees, like they're always so whatever. And,
Pharisees.
And so we just stop. As soon as we read this word Pharisee, we're like, okay, see ya. And now I'm like, oh, what are those? What are they up to and what are they concerned about? And I have a similar sort of feeling of like, okay, I can go with you. And then there's a point at which we have to part ways. And I'm mostly going to go with Jesus because like he's my guy. But we can go further down the road, both of us, than maybe we could have.
Than maybe we thought we could have. Mm-hmm.
All right, Amy, we have just moved a little bit.
Yeah.
A few verses since, half a chapter since our last time together. Is there anything in that end of chapter 5 that we want to pick up in order to prepare ourselves for today?
Well, I'll give you sort of a on one foot summary of the things that we have not read from that second part of chapter 5. First, there are a couple of stories of Jesus interacting with people who, like there's one person who has this skin disease that is commonly translated as leprosy, but is not actually leprosy. And then there's a person who is paralyzed who comes to be healed. His friends bring him to be healed.
Yeah.
And Jesus does heal both of those people of their physical afflictions, and also uses language of cleansing and forgiveness of sin sort of alongside the healing of physical afflictions.
Yeah.
And then the other two things that I think are maybe almost even more relevant, Jesus is hanging out with tax collectors, which, the Pharisees are like, what you doing?
Yeah.
Maybe we ought not be doing that. And Jesus very famously says, I am here not to be hanging out with people who are already on the path, but to people who might need help.
Yes.
That is actually my work in the world. And then there's also a question about why his followers do not fast in the way that the followers of John had fasted. And he makes this famous statement that the wedding guests don't fast while the bridegroom is with them.
Yeah.
And that, of all the stories, seems to sort of bring out the point that, like, I, Jesus, am different than John or anyone else. And the time we are in is different than any other time. And so rules that might apply under a different situation don't apply here.
Yeah.
And I imagine that, as we'll see, that idea is going to be hard for the Pharisees to hear, because they're trying to hold on to, those structures that have held their community for so long.
Yeah, that's really lovely, Amy. Most of those stories in that second part of chapter 5, maybe all of them, are also in the Gospel of Mark.
Yeah.
And so we talked through them. I think it was last year.
Yes.
There are also some of them in Matthew too, but last year I think we dealt with those issues. That where you landed just there of Jesus's identity is emerging, right? So Peter or Simon last time referred to him as master and then as Lord. And then these stories you're talking about, he's starting to say, no, hello, bridegroom over here. And the time we are in is a different kind of time. Maybe the rules are shifting. Like, that's really coming to the fore. And then here in chapter 6, it's really going to kind of like emerge out into the public. Like, okay, now if the time is different and the rules have changed, we're going to have to renegotiate some things. And that's going to get the Pharisees involved in a different kind of way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, so our text today is Luke 6, 1-16. I'll start in 6:1, and I'm reading in the Common English Bible. One Sabbath, as Jesus was going through the wheat fields, his disciples were picking the heads of wheat, rubbing them in their hands and eating them. Some Pharisees said, "Why are you breaking the Sabbath law?" Jesus replied, "Haven't you read what David and his companions did when they were hungry? He broke the law by going into God's house and eating the bread of the presence, which only the priests can eat. He also gave some of the bread to his companions. Then he said to them, 'The human one is Lord of the Sabbath.'" Okay, so I'm going to start with a very general question about, can you just help us think about Sabbath and its importance in Judaism, either now or at the time, or they're kind of similar?
Yeah, I feel like that's really the operative question for the first two of these three stories. So I'll say a little bit about it now, but maybe some more will come up. I mean, the Sabbath is a day that is set apart, like really fundamentally set apart as a different kind of day than all the other days, modeled on the 7 days of creation, the last day of which God is not creating things. The idea being that it's almost like, in order for creation to be complete and sort of witnessed, it has to be inhabited in a certain way. Like, you can make a whole Lego set, but if you never use it, did you really make it? And so the Sabbath is set apart as this day that humans, Jews, are not meant to try to change things about the world, but simply to be in the world and be in awe of it and appreciate it. And this is my understanding, like this is how the fullness of creation comes to be.
That's really lovely, Amy. You said something back, I think it was in our summer series on creation, that I've just been sitting with it for 9 months now or something, that in the first creation story in Genesis 1, human beings are created in the afternoon on day 6. I've always known that, yada, yada. But the point you made was, so their first experience of the created world was the Sabbath day.
Yeah.
And I had never thought in those terms before. It's sort of in my own mind, it's the natural human state is work.
Yes.
And then also we get to rest at the end.
Yes.
But when you frame it the way
your rest.
Yes. Yeah. But when you frame it the way you did, then it's the fundamental thing. The first experience is rest, and then you work. And that has been really transformative for me in thinking about Sabbath and humans.
Yeah, me too. Me too, really. And then this is operationalized in a particular way because, you have this sort of ideal. And then if you have a community that wants to say okay, how do we do that? They come up with lots of definitions that go along with the Sabbath. And so what we're going to see in these stories is we're bumping up against particular definitions of the Sabbath. Oh, let me say just one more thing in introduction, and then we can move on. A friend of mine who is Orthodox and keeps the Sabbath in a way that I do not, really a pretty traditional way, said to me once, and I've never forgotten it, you can't just keep the Sabbath on the Sabbath. If you're going to keep the Sabbath, it affects your whole week. You have to plan ahead. All the things that you can't do on the Sabbath, it doesn't mean you suddenly don't have to do them.
Right.
You still have to do them. You just have to do them on a different day.
Yes.
So if you're going to prepare all your food for the Sabbath ahead of time so you're not doing that work on Shabbat, guess what you're doing on Thursday night after work? That's...
Right.
You have to plan ahead for all of this. And it sort of creates a feeling in which your whole week is sort of pointed toward the Sabbath in a way that, sometimes feels hard and burdensome, but is necessary in order to be able to hold that space free and open.
That's beautiful.
And without work.
The other thing one might say about Sabbath also, I don't know what you'll think about this, but one of the commentators I was reading was saying, in the first century, when you think about essential markers of the Jewish community, Sabbath, circumcision, kashrut are kind of the big 3. Does that sound reasonable?
I think that sounds right.
And so this is not just some obscure
that's right.
Concept off to the side, but it is central to identity.
Yeah.
One thing that I think is important here, it's very subtle, but Luke says some Pharisees said, or in the Greek, some of the Pharisees said. And so I just want to point out that it's not the Pharisees as a monolith, but it's there's a set of Pharisees who are going to take up this sort of question, which suggests that there might be other Pharisees who would frame it differently, or would think about, so we see all these arguments internal to the rabbinic Pharisaic tradition, where they're trying to work out exactly the parameters of Sabbath law too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is not Jesus versus the Pharisees. This is Jesus entering into a conversation with some of the Pharisees.
Right.
What they say to him is, or I guess they're really saying it to the disciples, why are you breaking the Sabbath law? What they're doing is going through the wheat field, picking wheat and rubbing it in their hands and eating it. So do you have a sense of what are they concerned? Why are they seeing that and saying, oh, you're breaking Sabbath law? Yeah.
So the problem, maybe surprisingly, is not that they're just picking wheat from random people's fields. That actually is permissible.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier that this observance of Sabbath in the context of a people who are trying to do things together, it needs specificity about it.
Yeah.
And so the kind of specificity it gets is that there are certain types of work that are not allowed.
Yes.
And they are the types of work that would have accompanied the construction of the tabernacle in Exodus, because the commandment to keep the Sabbath is juxtaposed with that in Exodus.
Oh, interesting.
So there are 39 types, and one of them is harvesting things.
Yes.
You can't harvest things on the Sabbath. You just can't, because part of what happened related to the Mishkan was that they created these loaves of bread. And anyway, you just can't. It's just one of the rules. You can't do it. You should have planned ahead, picked your food on Friday, just like we got a double portion of manna on Fridays or in the Torah. You should have picked your food for the Sabbath earlier so that you could eat it today. But you didn't plan very well.
It's interesting because, the Torah, it's not entirely clear what biblical texts are being referenced here.
Mm-hmm.
Exodus 34:21, do your work for 6 days. On the seventh day, you should rest, even during plowing or harvest time. So that seems to be like what you're saying, harvesting, plowing, don't do that. But then if you look over in the Deuteronomy 23:25, if you go into your neighbor's grain field, you can pluck ears by hand, but you aren't allowed to cut off any of your neighbor's grain with a sickle. That's not about Sabbath. But
that's a different issue, yeah.
But it's a distinction between like what is you're not allowed to harvest your neighbor's field, but you are allowed to eat from your neighbor's field. And so there's a distinction possibly between just eating and harvesting.
So it could be that the issue here is that there's within the Jewish world, you could say, well, you can't harvest,
right.
but you could
We're not harvesting.
Some.
Yeah, we're not harvesting. We're just plucking a little to eat.
Yeah.
And so then there's this question of like, what exactly is work on the Sabbath? And is this work or is it not? That's one way you could read it. One of the things that might be playing in here is this concept of building a hedge around the Torah, building a fence around the Torah. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the way I understand that sort of general teaching is that often it is not exactly clear what the Torah is prohibiting or requiring.
Right.
And so we are careful not to get close to what we think it might be prohibiting. So don't start going down that road. Like, just don't get close, because it's a slippery slope. And if you really take seriously the imperative to do or not do what the Torah says, then you don't play chicken.
With the Torah. Yeah. So what we were just talking about with like maybe Deuteronomy 23 is making a distinction between harvesting and plucking. Then if you're trying to build a fence or a hedge around the Torah, you would say, okay, well, that's not clear, but let's take the most conservative reading of it to make sure we're not actually violating the Torah.
Yeah. And you can go too far with that. And within the Jewish community, there's a lot of conversation about that, because if you take everything in the most conservative reading, it can become overwhelming and a discouragement in general from doing it. But Bobby, this is not what Jesus says to them.
I mean, this is the way, like, you could logically come up with like Jesus is objecting to, okay, you guys are being too strict about your interpretation of the Torah. But what he says is, hey, but David did it. Or David did something sort of like this.
Yeah, but David did something that wasn't allowed.
Can you talk a little bit? First, can you remind us what that David story even is?
I think this is such a funny example to cite. And maybe you remember something about the story that I don't remember, but this is what I remember. So this is from 1 Samuel chapter 21. Saul is still sort of like officially king.
Yeah.
But they're in this very awkward time period where David is gonna be king, but is not officially king. And Saul is jealous and maybe sort of losing his mind and seems to be in pursuit of David. So
he just threw a spear at David in the previous chapter, I think. Like, David's like, I think David has been living in Saul's house until just now.
Yeah.
And then Saul tries to kill him and David has run away. Yeah.
Yeah. And Jonathan has done some reconnaissance to say, like, is David really in danger here? And the answer is yes, David is really in danger here. So David is sort of on the run, and he goes into the temple and tells the priest that he is in the service of Saul. Like, he lies to the priest.
Yeah.
He says he's in the service of Saul and he needs some provisions. He needs bread and he needs a sword.
Yeah.
And so the priest is sort of like, well, okay. And the only bread that he has is the bread that has been consecrated, and you would not ordinarily just give to someone even in the service of the king, but David has made it sound like this is really what Saul wants.
Yeah.
And so David winds up walking out of there with the bread of the presence, the consecrated bread that he can eat, and the sword of Goliath,
Yeah.
which had been, I don't know, held in some display case, I'm sure, in the temple. So I've been trying to think about why Jesus is pulling on
Why that, Jesus?
example.
There's so many other ways you could have gone, Jesus, but this is the one.
There are. Yeah. So, first of all, is there anything about the story that you think should be highlighted that I didn't highlight that might?
To me, what you have said
that?
is the gist of the story that seems some way or another to be relevant here.
Okay.
So do you have a thought about what Jesus is doing here?
I mean, I don't feel like I have a coherent thought. My first thought was it's an extenuating situation.
Yeah.
But a really different one.
I mean, you can get them sort of to be similar if you think that the disciples were desperately hungry.
Okay.
But the text doesn't actually talk about that. It just says they're walking through the field and they plucked some wheat and ate it.
And that's part of what's a little bit gives me empathy for the distress that the Pharisees feel is that the way that it's written, it sounds like they're almost absent-mindedly picking daisies.
Yeah. It does.
They pick a couple things of wheat and, have a little snack. It doesn't feel extenuating.
They're not famished and then, oh, thank God we finally found some wheat to eat. It's just a casual, I agree with you.
Or it could be that David is David.
Yeah.
And that is the extenuating circumstance. That David is not like another person.
I think you're onto it there. That's the most straightforward way to interpret it for me is that David is David.
Yeah.
David has determined that the circumstances justify this action.
Yes.
And therefore they do, whether or not they really do.
It's not a question of objectively, do we think they do? It's that David is the anointed king.
Yeah.
Even if people don't know it yet.
Right.
And so David can do what David needs to do.
And so Jesus then is son of David. And so he's got that David connection.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody in the Bible Worm Collaborative put a really fine point on this, which I had not articulated so well for myself. But drawing out that parallel, they said, look, David was the anointed king who nobody yet knew was the anointed one. Jesus is the anointed Messiah who nobody yet knows is the anointed Messiah.
Yes.
So they're both exercising authority that they have, but that nobody really knows that they have.
Yeah.
And so that, to me, that makes some sense of it. Jesus in this moment of sort of widespread revelation is like David. He's in the line of David, and he has the authority to decide what is legitimate in this circumstance, even if it violates the Torah on its face.
That's so interesting, Bobby. I appreciate that fine point. And it's making me remember, too, in the David story, there is a witness to this, who I call Doug. I'm sure that's not how you say his name. D-O-E-G, Doeg.
I like to call him Doug, too. I think it's like Doeg or something. I have to look at the Hebrew. Yeah. Doeg.
Yeah. who witnesses it and eventually does, report this back, and it causes, it's a thing.
Yeah.
There are repercussions for this action. But yes, people who see someone who has sort of secret, unknown authority doing something that is not ordinarily allowed, it's a problem.
My neighbor, there's an apartment complex across from my house, and there was this couple sitting out there with their dog one day a few years ago, and I was like, hey, what's your dog's name? And their dog's name was Doug. And it just makes me, because Doug the dog.
Yeah.
But to me, dogs that have people names, especially just regular old people names, Doug.
I just met a dog named Howard.
That's amazing. Yeah. So what Jesus says at the end then is the human one is Lord of the Sabbath.
Yes.
Which seems to build on the story that he just told, maybe in this way about authority. Mark has a line in here that says, Sabbath was made for humans, not humans for the Sabbath. But Luke leaves that out. I don't know that matters here, but anyway, what Luke records is that Jesus just says the human one. The CEB translates that phrase, the Son of Man, as the human one. There are other ways one could get at that. So in other translations, in the NRSV, probably you read the Son of Man as Lord of the Sabbath or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. The Son of Man. Mm-hmm.
What do you think Jesus means by that? And how does it relate to what's been going on?
I mean, I think he is precisely claiming that authority that we just spoke of, that the Pharisees have no reason to necessarily know that he would have.
Right.
But he's not addressing their objection logically.
Yeah.
And I think it's particularly interesting to think about the fact that he probably could have, based on the point that you just raised. But the point is not that. The point really, it's kind of like a smackdown.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of like I'm in charge.
Yeah. Sabbath law is what I say Sabbath law is. Right. Because I'm son of man.
Because of who I am. Right.
Just like because of who David was.
Yeah.
That's the way I read it too, is he has taken their question as an opportunity to sort of claim his identity and his own authority and just kind of said, this is the way that it is.
Yeah. But he does not say, who cares about the Sabbath?
He does not. That's right. You're right.
And it's really interesting to me to think about, if there were other arguments in his mind, but that he's not going to have them.
Yes, so that's exactly right. So as the one with authority, he has determined that it's okay for his disciples to be eating grain on the Sabbath. Mm-hmm. But it's not just like Sabbath schmabbeth, It's,
exactly. Right.
It's like
do whatever
this
you want.
This thing that they are doing is okay.
Yes.
And whether it's in this circumstance or whether it's because they're with me or whether it's because it's fine for people to eat food on the Sabbath or prepare food on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
It's not entirely clear.
Yeah.
Somebody in the Bible Worm Collaborative was wanting to read the human one as like a reference to Jesus' humanity, his identification with other humans. If you read it that way, then you would really be saying something like, humankind is the Lord of the Sabbath, which gets you closer to that, like Sabbath was made for humans, not humans for the Sabbath. Mm-hmm. I've been playing with that in my head. I think it's worth sort of following that and seeing where it goes. But what I keep coming back to is, if that was Luke's point, why did he leave out where Mark just straight up said that?
Yeah.
So I keep coming out where you and I just came out, which is like, this is actually claiming about Jesus's unique
special authority.
But maybe he's also saying that human well-being on the Sabbath is really the ultimate goal. Something like that. You shouldn't be hungry on the Sabbath.
You're making me think of a line. I have to look up who said the quote, which I can do in a minute. But more than the Jews have kept the Sabbath has kept the Jews. Which really is just another way at sort of getting at what is the relationship between the Jewish community and this day. And it is complicated and evolving. Like if every human one just decides what they do or don't want to do on the Sabbath, then it doesn't hold the community together in any way and doesn't,
any way at all. Yeah.
So that's too loose. And also, and this day is not a punishment. This day is a blessing.
Right.
So there's always some tension in there.
Yeah. Hi everyone, it's Bobby here. This month, Bible Worm has a special offer just for you. If you've ever thought about joining our Patreon, now is the time. For the month of January, we're giving all our subscribers access to the full range of Bible Worm features. If you join now at the Bible Worm supporter level, you can get early access to episodes, weekly worship liturgies, and video Bible studies, all for just $4 for the month. If you've ever wanted to try out our Patreon, now's the time. We hope you'll join us. And now, back to this week's episode. So So the tension that you're naming is going to get developed in a particular kind of way in the next little section of text, which starts in verse 6. On another Sabbath, Jesus entered a synagogue to teach. A man was there whose right hand was withered. The legal experts and the Pharisees were watching him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. They were looking for a reason to bring charges against him. Jesus knew their thoughts, so he said to the man with the withered hand, "Get up and stand in front of everyone." He got up and stood there. Jesus said to the legal experts and Pharisees, "Here's a question for you. Is it legal on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it?" Looking around at them all, he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." So he did, and his hand was made healthy. They were furious and began talking with each other about what to do to Jesus. So I just want to start by thinking about the man who is the one being healed in this little story. He's just said to be a man with a withered right hand. What do you think about that guy?
I hadn't given a whole lot of thought to it other than just the sort of practicality of it, that he has one hand that he can't use for all the things a person might use a hand for.
But he still seems to have his other hand that he can use.
He doesn't, from what I can tell from this description, he doesn't seem to be in pain. He doesn't seem to be unable to care for himself. He doesn't seem to, this is not the story of the man in the previous chapter whose friends have him sort of on a gurney and lower him down through the ceiling. Like, I don't have any sense of that, but that you can look at him and see that one hand doesn't function in all the ways that a hand might function.
The detail of the right hand there, if you want to make that significant, I think it would be that just biologically, the right hand is the dominant hand, but also culturally, right hand was sort of it was deemed to sort of be the more important hand. And so one possibility of why the word right is there is to sort of say this might be slightly different if it was his left hand because it's his offhand or whatever. Yeah. But the right hand is the more urgent hand. But it's not, like you're saying, it's not a super urgent issue in any way you frame it.
Bobby, I'm thinking also about, there's a line in Psalm 137 that says, "If I forget thee, Jerusalem, let my right hand," I've often seen it as wither or...
Oh, interesting.
I don't know that we should import that here.
Yeah.
But it does seem like maybe there is, we could and sort of see where it goes. Or it does seem like there is sort of, as you're saying, some kind of, awareness that it's not great if your right hand is not functioning.
The way that I like that connection a lot, I think probably as far as I'm prepared to go with it right now is just that, the great oath that they can think of is let my right hand be impaired. And so it just emphasizes the importance of the right hand in particular.
Yeah.
The text tells us that the Pharisees are watching, the legal experts and the Pharisees watching closely because they were looking for a reason to bring charges against him. So this is there's a little bit of surveillance going on. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts about why? Maybe it comes out of that last story that we were just talking about, but any sense of why they're suddenly kind of surveilling Jesus?
I guess my best sense is that it seems like he is becoming a powerful voice in the Jewish community who does not seem to want to engage with them in their arenas of debate.
Yeah.
But instead is just claiming authority to do things. I know it can be hard to read this story, maybe especially for Christians, as that's a problem or that's scary. But he's not Jesus at this point in the story. He is, but he's just a guy who is saying, "I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. and he has followers. Like,
Yeah.
that's, I mean, I feel like they should be surveilling him.
Yes.
Like, what is this?
Yeah.
What is this guy doing? What is this guy going to do next?
No, that's really helpful because I do think we have a tendency as Christians to be like, but that's Jesus. Like, it's all good.
Yeah.
But if you, like, the parallel would be somebody who showed up today claiming messianic identity and sort of gathering a group of followers, like, you would watch them if they came into your place, you know?
Yes.
Even if it turns out retrospectively they are legitimately who they say they are.
Yes. You don't know at the time. You don't know.
We get this notice here again that Jesus knew their thoughts. We talked about that a little bit in the Nazareth sermon story, that Jesus, I don't know, either he knew what the people were thinking or he made something up. I don't quite know there. But here it's clear enough that Jesus is responding to something the Pharisees have not exactly, I mean, they haven't said it.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of, like, when you think about that, do you think like Jesus just like can tell like they're talking into their pins or, you know, like secret like watches or whatever, and Jesus is like, something's going on here? Or do you read this as like he actually kind of has insight into their deep thoughts?
The way I was understanding it, although I could see it in any number of ways now, is that he was raised in this world. Like, he was talking with the Pharisees in the temple as a young child. Like, he knows how this world works.
Yes.
He knows what he is doing is going to be troublesome. And so I imagine that he fully would have predicted that even if they weren't acting weird, which they might have been, he is upsetting the system in a way that they're going to respond to. I think he knows exactly what he's doing.
I think that's exactly right, Amy. It also draws your mind back to Simeon's little pronouncement about Jesus when he was an infant in the temple back in chapter 2. And Simeon said that the inner thoughts of many will be revealed. And so I think Jesus may be just revealing their inner thoughts by being very aware of his surroundings and what the nature of people is. Although it may also be prophetic insight. Like, I don't have any objection to that idea.
Yeah.
But this idea that the things people sort of hold deep in them that they aren't ready to say out loud, like, those get called out. And here the Pharisees are getting called out in that kind of a way.
Yeah, I love that you brought that back from earlier in the gospel.
The thing that Jesus does is he calls the man with the withered hand up to the front. And then the question he poses to the Pharisees, is it legal on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save a life or to destroy it? So in some way or another, he's trying to put it to them. Can you help me think about what exactly he's trying to raise there?
I mean, the most sort of grounded, practical example I could think of is that there are things within the world of accepted Jewish law that always trump everything else.
Yes.
And one of those is saving a life. So if you have the opportunity to save a life and it's Sabbath, you save a life.
Yeah.
And I guess what I hear in Jesus's question is whether there should be more of a continuum there, like whether the boundaries of what constitutes saving a life should be softened in some way. How do you understand what he's saying there?
That's really helpful, because I think sometimes Christians may misread this to say, oh, the Pharisees are like, you can't do anything on the Sabbath no matter what the stakes are, which is simply not true, as you're saying, that there is this principle that if a life is in danger, then that trumps the Sabbath law. The way Jesus asked the question backs you into a corner a little bit. The options are save a life or destroy it. What the Pharisees seem to be saying, at least the way I would read them, is, look, this guy's got a withered hand. Like, that's not life-threatening. It might be livelihood-threatening, but it's not life-threatening. So he could come back tomorrow and be healed tomorrow, and that would be great. So this is not a life-threatening situation. And so let's just wait.
Yeah.
His question, at least the way I'm reading it, doesn't allow the sort of let's just wait a day. it's saying either you're going to save that life or you're going to destroy it. Like not acting is acting negatively.
That's really helpful. I see how you're reading it, and I hadn't been reading it that way, but I like the edge that puts on the question. I had been reading it just as, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath? Is it lawful to do harm on the Sabbath? Is it lawful to save a life? Is it lawful to destroy a life? But not that
I think that's a reasonable
in every
reading.
moment you are either doing good or doing harm.
Yeah.
And we now, in this moment, are going to save a life or destroy a life.
Yeah.
And we can't, there's no pause button on that.
That I think the way that you were initially reading it is a totally legitimate reading, but what you run into with that is like, is it lawful to do harm on the Sabbath? Is kind of that's just a really mealy question. Like, no, of course.
No.
But so if you frame it this other way, the New Testament scholar John Carroll, who wrote the New Testament Library Commentary on Luke, framed it as to do nothing when mercy is necessary is to do harm. And I thought that's really puts a nice point on it.
Yeah, I hear that. I do.
And so Jesus, maybe what he's doing is exactly, I mean, it's what you were saying. He's trying to expand the boundaries of what is legal to do, not just save a life, but more than that. But he's expanded it, I think, maybe to the point of if somebody is in need and you don't do anything, then you're actually harming them.
Yeah.
No matter what the need is, and no matter how urgent it is, if you just say, come back tomorrow, when they need something today, then that's been a violation of Sabbath for Jesus, maybe. Opens the door to a very porous Sabbath. It does.
Because I feel like you could, like if part of the driving idea of the Sabbath is for a day we do not exert power on creation, we are creatures in creation, there's like an infinite amount of good you could always be doing all the time.
Yes. There's always someone in need of mercy.
There's always someone in need of mercy. And so I understand what Jesus is saying. And again, this is why I'm like, that is a good rabbinic question. Like, how do we wrestle with that?
Yeah.
But for me, it is not at all clear cut how we what the answer to that question is, because I don't know how Sabbath coexists with not even just Sabbath, just like being a human in the world sort of coexists if at all times you are either doing good or doing harm.
Yeah, the command to cease doing, and then when we've interpreted ceasing to do is actually harm doing.
Yes. There are times when that's clearly true in the world, but I don't honestly know if I think this is one of those times. Like, this guy didn't ask for anything.
He didn't. Yeah.
He doesn't say anything the whole time.
He doesn't at all.
I don't know.
He does not at all. Yeah.
I don't know.
It's interesting. At this point in the text, Jesus has sort of made two kind of arguments for stretching the Sabbath law, at least. One is, I'm Jesus, and the human one has authority over the Sabbath. The other is mercy trumps everything. Anyone in need of mercy. And in both cases, you have responded, I think, in the way that the Pharisees are responding, in a sense, with, but if you stretch Sabbath that far, then what then is the Sabbath?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, which is you can see the issue here in a really clear way.
And I don't know if it's, in the first case, Jesus says, I'm Jesus, just sort of claims his authority. But I don't know if this is supposed to be a claim for everybody to be doing this all the time, or if this is Jesus saying, I'm really kind of categorically different here.
The first one to me seemed where Jesus says the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. That seems more confined to Jesus can kind of decide.
Yeah.
This one seems to me like more of a general principle. If you see someone in need of mercy, show them mercy, even on the Sabbath.
Yeah.
It's interesting then that the way Jesus actually heals the man So he says, stretch out your hand.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing, he didn't do
That's right.
anything.
That's right.
The man takes out his hand and now it's not withered anymore.
Yes.
So no one has done anything.
Yes.
And yet a miracle has been done.
Yes.
I mean, I don't like the way that I tend to read that is Jesus. I mean, Jesus is always doing stuff like this where you can't actually accuse him of having done anything.
Yep.
And he, even though he very clearly did something. Is that the way you read it too? Or do you see something else there?
No, I mean, I think that is the way I read it, although maybe my approach to it comes more from the Jewish perspective. I was like, did he break the Sabbath? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I went back and like looked at like the 39, categories of activities you're not supposed to do. I'm like, I don't like magical healing is not, it's not listed here.
The other thing that's happening there is that the voice of the healing is passive. It was made healthy.
Yes.
And so it's not even clear that Jesus did a magical healing. It's that a magical healing was done
Yep.
after Jesus said this thing. So you're like, I'm pretty sure you did that. But like in a court of law or whatever,
Yes.
there's plausible deniability. Like, I just told him to stretch out his hand.
That's right.
I sort of like that. I mean, Jesus is a slippery guy, and I kind of like it. Like he's made a very strong point, and then the actual like implications of that have worked themselves out in a way that you can't actually pin anything on him.
Right. And he knows that they are looking to pin something on him at this point because he's making people nervous.
So the text says that they're furious.
I would be.
Yeah. And I think the furiousness is partly because he did the thing that they told him not to do. And part of the thing is that he did it in a way that they can't.
That's right.
They didn't get what they wanted, which was to accuse him of something.
Yes.
They've been made to look kind of stupid, and so now they're really mad.
Yeah.
There's a third little section of text here, beginning in verse 12, that deals with what maybe is just a totally different topic. I don't know. But it's about the call of the disciples. So I'm picking up in call of the apostles. I should be more precise in my language. Picking up in verse 12. During that time, Jesus went out to the mountain to pray, and he prayed to God all night long. At daybreak, he called together his disciples. He chose 12 of them, whom he called apostles. Simon, whom he named Peter, his brother Andrew, James, John, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James the son of Alphaeus, Simon, who was called a zealot, Judas the son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. So this story begins with Jesus away praying on a mountain for the full night. I'm just curious what you see in that little detail.
I just feel so aware, and I think this is mentioned in chapter 5 too, that like Jesus goes back and forth between being really immersed in the stickiest parts of human life.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's big crowds, and sometimes it's complicated arguments, and it's whatnot, and then he kind of withdraws to almost, I think of it as almost like try to tune into some different horizon or like attach himself to a different plane of existence. Like he's moving back and forth between these extended, I don't know if conversations with God is the right word. That's not exactly how I think about prayer, but community with God.
Yeah.
And community with people. But they do seem a little bit held apart from each other.
Yeah.
Does that seem fair to you?
That seems fair to me too. Yeah. That language of went out to the mountain, like it's very unclear exactly what mountain we're talking about. And I kind of think maybe it doesn't matter. It's the mountainness of the mountain.
Yeah.
Which takes your head back, I think, first to Moses and Sinai and going to commune with God in that way. Maybe also to Elijah on Horeb, who goes and sort of similarly comes out of the fray to the mountain, and God sort of deals with him and then sends him back into the fray. And so that Jesus is sort of participating in that kind of, with the people doing the thing and then pulling back in the way that prophets do, sort of regrouping communing with God. And
That's
then
such a
entering.
helpful and interesting comparison, because that I think of Moses going up to the mountain so differently, because God is like all over the place and like super overwhelming. And
that is true.
story, and the people are
That
like,
is true.
whoa,
What
we are
is
not going up
happening?
that mountain with you.
Yeah.
And this seems so much more, it feels to me like, I guess I'm just projecting this. Like Jesus is sort of initiating this. Like Jesus is withdrawing from the people for a short time to go up to this mountain and be with prayer, be with God.
Jesus in this gospel often does this in key moments. We already saw it, sort of the baptism seems to have happened this way, where Jesus was off somewhere praying when the Holy Spirit descended on him. Here we see it. We'll see it again at the Mountain of Transfiguration. We'll see it again in the Garden of Gethsemane. That at key moments in Jesus's life, especially in the Gospel of Luke, but maybe in all of the Gospels, he sort of withdraws and has a special moments with God, and then goes back into the world. So what Jesus does then after his night is bring together his disciples. And so there seems to be like a largish group of people who are going around with Jesus. And we don't really know how many there are. Out of those disciples, he chooses 12 and calls them apostles. So I'm curious what you see in that sort of the shift from disciple to apostle, and if there's significance you see to the number 12.
Yeah. I mean, 12, I guess I would imagine, it could be related to the 12 tribes of Israel.
I think so.
Yeah, that shift from disciple to apostle, the Jewish annotated New Testament has a note that this word that's used for apostle, if you sort of try to work back from the Greek to the Hebrew, is shaliach, which is like a messenger, but it's like a messenger who is as good as the person themselves. Like it's not just someone who has a message. Like it's not just I'm giving you a message to pass on to someone. It's you can speak for me.
Yes.
And so you have to have internalized that person's way pretty well to be able to speak for them or be pretty aligned with them already. Like it feels like a really sort of living kind of relationship, because it's not a singular stale message. It's something that has to be able to respond to whatever's actually happening around the apostle or shaliach.
I really like that a lot, Amy. The Gospel of Luke we mentioned when we first started reading the Gospel this year is the first part of the two-part series that ends with the Acts of the Apostles. And it really is in the book of Acts that the apostles are the ones who are carrying Jesus's word into the world with the authority of Jesus. Yeah. And so this little moment, the shift from disciple to apostle, exactly as you're saying, sets up that sort of transition to them being the ones who enact Jesus's ministry in the world.
So I can see why that would have to be a smaller group, because they're going to need some you have to spend some real time with someone to be able to do that, even just on a human level, let alone in relationship to Jesus.
Disciple sort of implies one who is a follower of. Apostle implies someone who is sent by. And so there's lots of people who follow, and then this few who are sent. We get a list of the 12. It's interesting, the lists that we get 4 times that we get lists of apostles. And they are in Mark, Matthew, Luke, and Acts. And they are mostly the same. The first 9 are always the same, except sometimes Matthew is named Levi, and Mark calls him Levi. There's 2 things that are, one is here we get Simon, who is called a zealot. In Matthew and Mark, he's called Simon the Canaanian or Simon the Canaanite.
Interesting.
I don't know that matters, but anything about zealot, Jesus having a zealot follower?
I feel like the word zealot has, for good reason, a kind of negative connotation in my mind at this point.
Yeah.
But I also feel like every team needs someone who is so gung-ho. Like they are the battery pack of this operation and they are the activator and they're gonna, things might just seem super black and white to them in a way that it's not to other people. But in the context of a group of people, I think having a zealot along with you is a really good and powerful thing. A whole team of zealots can be a little scary.
Yeah, a little overwhelming. Yeah. I think that's right. It's interesting in this time period. Luke is being written probably in the 80s. And so just after the war with Rome and the destruction of the temple, in which there was a political party called the Zealots, who were the nationalist revolutionaries. And so it is possible to read the Zealot, Simon the Zealot, the way you have done, which is he's a zealous guy.
Yes.
It is also possible to read it as a political affiliation, that he's an anti-Roman revolutionary.
Yeah.
Which is also a zealous guy, but it brings a more specific
particular
connotation
kind.
to it.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't quite know what to do with that, but I always think it's interesting to think about the possibility that Jesus had an anti-Roman revolutionary among his apostles.
That seems like something he would do.
It does. It totally does. Yeah. The other difference in these lists is Matthew and Mark have Thaddeus, where Luke has Judas, the son of James. I don't know that there's anything to say about that other than I always feel really bad for Judas, the son of James.
Yeah. Maybe he decided to go by Thaddeus.
Yeah, that might be. He was Judas, the son of James. And he had to be constantly saying like, no, I'm the other Judas. And so he went by his middle name. He was Judas Thaddeus bin James.
Bobby, when these different lists have different names, is it understood to be different people or that the people went by various names?
It depends on your inclination, I think. Like one is like, there were 9 core disciples who are kind of consistently named, and then maybe there's some disagreement. But the other is like, if you're a sort of a biblical like inerrantist, you would have to say something like, it's the same guys, but they use different names in different contexts. The one that's so interesting to me, who's also, of course, in the other lists, is Judas Iscariot. And then Luke takes the time to say, who became a traitor.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, like, having a traitor named as a traitor in the middle of this sort of apostolic sending, I don't know what to do with that, but it seems like you could have just not. Or maybe you couldn't not say that because everybody knew or something. I don't know. Do you think it's important that he names his traitorness here?
Well, I will tell you the question that it's putting in my head. So maybe that means if it's making me question things, I do think it's important. But I've wondered about the relationship between the prayer experience Jesus had and the calling of the apostles. And the text doesn't tell us that, like how exactly those things are related to each other.
Yeah.
But if I don't know. I feel like it raises the question for me, which you'll probably say, of course, that was always the plan. But like, was this the plan all along, that you have chosen someone who is going to be a traitor and the wheels are set in motion for that now and it is divinely ordained as such?
Yeah.
I feel like it just puts a finer point on that question for me.
Yeah.
Is it important to you that he's named a traitor?
It is important to me just because Luke could have not done it, but he did it. And so like it's literarily important to me. And I don't quite theologically know. One way of doing it is to say, yes, Judas was already a traitor at this moment and it was foreordained and Jesus already knew. I'm not particularly drawn to that just because, ironically, for a Presbyterian, foreordainment is not really a thing that I am drawn to. But just the idea, because the way the CEB translates it anyway is Judas who became a traitor.
Yes, NRSV also.
And so to me, that's sort of interesting that here you are, you've prayed all night, you're appointing the 12 whom you trust the most, but one of them is going to betray you. And there's this sense of like, even when you're Jesus and you pray about it and you appoint, even in your closest circle. Right.
You decide to tighten your circle and try to really mind meld with those 12.
Yeah. There's still the possibility.
A risk that is there.
Amy, the Bible Worm Collaborative was really, I don't know, they were curious maybe about the connection of this text about the disciples to the previous two stories in 1 to 11 about Sabbath. And that, one could have done this text differently. So you just ended at verse 11 and then,
Yeah.
And so the narrative lectionary has given us a text unit that is not a necessary text unit. I'm curious if you see any connection or can draw any connection between the Sabbath stories and this disciples story.
What's coming to my mind, I feel like applies to one of the Sabbath stories, but not quite the other. But that first story where we pointed out that Jesus does not, actually in both stories, Jesus is not going to engage in real debate with the Pharisees. He's not going to sort of go to their home turf in that way. But in the first story, Jesus just says, like, it's this way because I say it's this way and I have the authority. And I feel like by naming apostles, that's a way of sort of spreading that authority or recognizing, like, if all of this is possible just because of the singularness of Jesus, that has a certain limitation around it.
I like that a lot, Amy, if I understand you correctly, which is here we have the authority Jesus has claimed sort of being distributed a little bit among the apostles.
Yeah. It opens up some door for that, I guess.
The other connection that's there is right at the end of that, in verse 11, we've got the introduction of danger into the equation. They're really trying to do something to Jesus, and then he calls the apostles.
Yes.
If you take that together with what you were saying, then we've got sort of being an apostle is bearing the authority of Jesus and also assuming the risk of that authority.
Yeah, and it does, and it's a recognition of, like, in the beginning of this, the singular authority of Jesus, and then also the vulnerability of Jesus as one person who is living in a human body.
Yes.
And so those things together, I could totally see how that would lead to apostles.
All right, Amy. So as you look at these verses, these three little stories here, you're thinking about our world today, what kind of connections are you making?
I find myself really wondering about Jesus's choice not to engage in the community conversation that logically would have followed from his decisions about the Sabbath. As a Jewish person, I wish that he had those conversations because this is the, like, potentially great Rabbi Jesus that I would like to hear from. But that's not what Jesus is up to, and that's not how he goes about this. And it's just making me wonder, like, when in the context of community does it make sense to engage in the conversation that's sort of on the following the rules that the community usually follows? Like, can you shape the community from the inside? Can you shape things over time? Like, what would that path have looked like? Versus when you need to do something more radical and say, like, no, I'm not going to engage on your terms, even though I know your terms. I'm not going to do that. And so that just, I don't have a really concrete example in my mind, but it's just making me think about all these sort of debates in our modern life in the religious world, but also in the secular world. And when I might choose to use the ground rules set by the authorities who have power within that community, as opposed to when I say, I'm actually not going to do that.
Yeah.
I'm going to do something else. It takes a lot of chutzpah to say, I'm not going to follow the rules of the leaders of the community that I'm part of.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's the right thing. And sometimes it's not the right thing. So that is the question that this text is sort of leaving me with. What about you, Bobby?
As you probably will imagine, I am really drawn, sort of maybe naively so, to this middle story about the withered hand.
Yes.
And that sort of conclusion that John Carroll said, to do nothing when mercy is necessary is to do harm.
Yes.
I'm really drawn to that. And the idea of neutrality is not really a thing.
Yes.
And that you're either doing good in the world or you are harming the world. And so that's where I land, is like, yes, that is a good way to think about it. Our conversation, though, is helping me to problematize that, as you so often do, about also rest is necessary and community identity is necessary. And so what are the limits of are there limits to doing mercy? Mm-hmm. And if so, what are they? And how do we do that in a way that takes care of ourselves and it attends to the community and all those other things? This is going to come up, I think, again and maybe again and again in the Gospel of Luke. Jesus in Luke is always sort of spreading out to like do mercy, do as much mercy as you can for as many people as need it. And I'm really drawn to that, but also it is a highly difficult thing and complicated thing to think about. Well, how would you actually do that and still be a functional and faithful human?
Yeah.
I say all of that just to say I think this is going to be an ongoing conversation and an ongoing struggle. Mm-hmm. But I like the principle of doing mercy is the thing that is more important than the other things.
Yeah, there's this, I'm sure you have heard this quote by Elie Wiesel that is this encouragement to we must take sides. Neutrality. Yes. In that case, he's talking more politically. He says neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. We don't have to think about it politically. We could think about it in this case, which has nothing to do with, well, I guess it does sort of have to do with politics because he's in this argument with the Pharisees, but in terms of offering healing and mercy to someone. But yeah, we are limited humans. So how do we square all that?
Well, next week, we're going to read 2 stories about Jesus showing mercy to folks and doing a couple of miracles. We'll be in Luke chapter 7, 1-17.
All righty.
Thanks for this conversation, Amy. I'll see you next time.
Thanks. I'll see you next time. Be well.
Bye. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of Bible Worm. If you've enjoyed this free podcast, we hope you'll help us keep it going by joining our Patreon for as little as $4 per month. You can also sign up for other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast for details.
Bible Worm is produced and edited by Bobby Williamson. Our theme song is sung by Colin Bagby, and our theme music is The World at Large by Dano Songs. Many thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping make this podcast possible.
Join us again next time when we'll discuss 2 stories of healing told in Luke 7, 1-17. Until then, keep on digging.